early 1944. In the officers' lounge of a Luftwaffe airbase in Italy, German pilots laughed as intelligence officers briefed them on a new American fighter group entering combat. The report said the unit was all black. The Germans smirked. To them, the idea that the US would entrust frontline aircraft to African American pilots sounded absurd. Across the Mediterranean, in North Africa, those very pilots were suiting up. They were the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield, the first black military aviators in US history. They had spent years fighting prejudice at home before facing the enemy abroad. Now, under the bright African sun, they painted their P-51 Mustangs with a simple mark that would soon become legendary: red tails. The Germans mocked them before ever seeing them. Even some American commanders doubted they could handle high-risk escort missions. For months, the 392nd had been assigned to secondary duties, coastal patrols, ground attack, far from the headlines. Yet every mission, every sortie, sharpened their skill and discipline. They learned to fly tight, protect each other, and bring their bombers home intact. In the mess halls of Foggia and Ramitelli, rumors spread among bomber crews. If you see red tails, you'll make it back. To the Luftwaffe, those red tails soon meant trouble. The arrogance that had filled the briefing rooms would vanish when the mockers finally met the men they had laughed at, pilots who would rack up over 100 victories in the skies of Europe. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen was not born in glory, but in disbelief. It began with laughter, and it ended with respect. Before they ever reached Europe, the men who became the Red Tails had to fight their first battle, not against the Luftwaffe, but against their own country's prejudice. In 1941, the U.S. Army Air Corps reluctantly approved a program to train black pilots at Tuskegee, Alabama. Officially, it was called an experiment. Unofficially, many officers expected it to fail. The idea that African Americans could master advanced aircraft and complex navigation was openly mocked across the military, but a few men refused to let it fail. Charles Chief Anderson, a veteran flight instructor, and Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., one of the first black graduates of West Point, built the foundation of what became one of the most disciplined flying units in U.S. history. Training at Tuskegee was grueling. The heat, the dust, and the endless inspections tested patience and endurance. Every cadet knew that one mistake could be used to condemn the entire program. They studied harder, flew longer, and held themselves to standards higher than anyone demanded. Racism was constant. Local businesses refused service to cadets. Some white instructors resigned rather than teach them. But one flight at a time, the airmen proved that skill had no color. By 1943, the experiment had become an undeniable success. Graduates of Tuskegee moved on to North Africa and Italy, flying P-40 Warhawks, later P-47 Thunderbolts, and finally the P-51 Mustangs that made them famous. Their leader, Colonel Davis, drilled one lesson above all. Our job is to stay with the bombers, every single one. They weren't flying for fame. They were flying to prove a point. That courage and competence could destroy not just enemy aircraft, but the barriers built at home. The red paint on their tails wasn't decoration. It was defiance. A signal to the world that those who had been doubted were now defending the skies of freedom. When the 382nd Fighter Group finally deployed to Italy in early 1944, there were no parades waiting for them. They arrived quietly at Ramitelli Airfield, a dusty stretch of runway on the Adriatic coast, where American bombers took off daily to strike targets deep inside occupied Europe. Their first assignment wasn't glamorous, bomber escort duty, but for the Tuskegee Airmen, that was exactly where they wanted to be. The skies over Italy were some of the most dangerous in the world. Every mission meant meeting Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, and flak bursts that could tear a formation apart in seconds. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. gathered his pilots and gave them one rule: stay with the bombers, no matter what. Other fighter groups often chased German aircraft away from their formations, eager for kills. The 332nd didn't. They held their line, protecting their bombers with absolute discipline. To the crews inside the B-17s and B-24s, those red tails became a symbol of safety. On their early missions, the Luftwaffe didn't take them seriously. Reports from German interceptors described them as inexperienced. But the Red Tails learned fast. By spring, they were flying as tight and professional as any unit in the Mediterranean. Their skill began turning heads and saving lives. In March 1944, on an escort run to Anzio, the Tuskegee pilots shot down several enemy fighters without losing a single bomber. It was a small victory, but it changed everything. Word spread through the 8th and 15th Air Forces. If the Red Tails are with you, you'll make it home. What began as an experiment had become a legend in motion. Above the smoke and clouds of Italy, those Red Tails started rewriting both air warfare and history itself. By the spring of 1944, the Tuskegee Airmen were no longer just newcomers. Their red-tailed Mustangs were now a familiar sight above the clouds. And finally, the Luftwaffe took notice. On June 9th, 1944, the 332nd was escorting bombers over Munich when radar stations lit up with incoming German fighters. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf-109s climbed to intercept. The Germans expected another easy victory. American pilots they could scatter and destroy. But what they found that day was different. As the Luftwaffe dove into attack, the Red Tails held formation. No panic, no chaos, just calm precision. The German pilots, trained to exploit confusion, suddenly found none. They broke through the bomber screen and turned for home. But the Red Tails were waiting. What followed was one of the fiercest dogfights of the campaign. Flying in disciplined pairs, the Tuskegee pilots hunted their attackers with deadly accuracy. Captain Charles McGee, Lieutenant Lee Archer, and others scored multiple kills in minutes. When the fight ended, 5 German fighters had been shot down. The bombers, every one of them, returned safely. Word reached the Luftwaffe's intelligence section that evening. New American unit, Red Tails, extremely aggressive, no losses. German pilots began warning each other. The red-tailed Mustangs weren't inexperienced after all. They were disciplined, patient, and deadly. Soon, they earned a name even their enemies respected. Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. For the first time, the mockery turned to respect. The same pilots who had laughed at reports of an all-black squadron were now seeing Red Tails flash through their gun sights and losing aircraft to them. From the Mediterranean to the Danube, the legend of the 332nd was spreading fast. They weren't just proving themselves, they were changing what victory looked like in the sky. By late 1944, one pilot among the Red Tails had begun to stand out. Lieutenant Lee Archer, born in New York City, was known for his quiet confidence and surgical precision in the air. To his comrades, he wasn't flashy, he was focused. To the Germans, he was deadly. On October 12th, 1944, Archer took off from Ramitelli Airfield on a bomber escort mission to Memmingen, Germany. The 332nd's job was the same as always: protect the bombers at all costs. Halfway through the mission, radar spotted enemy movement. A swarm of Bf-109s was climbing fast from below. As the enemy closed in, Archer led his section straight into them. He dove, rolled, and fired, his tracers cutting across the sky. The first German fighter exploded in a flash of flame. Seconds later, a second fell spinning through the clouds. Archer climbed back up, regrouped, and attacked again. A third kill, then a fourth. When the fight was over, 4 enemy aircraft were down. Archer returned to base calm and silent, his P-51 streaked with oil and powder. The ground crew counted the bullet holes and realized what he'd done. Later, records confirmed a 5th victory from an earlier mission, making Lee Archer the first Black American ace of World War II. The news spread quietly through the squadron. No press, no fanfare. But among the Red Tails, it meant everything. They had fought for the right to fly, and now one of their own had reached the highest mark of aerial excellence. The Luftwaffe's mockery had long vanished. German pilots who once laughed at the idea of black fighter aces now faced them in deadly silence. For Archer and his brothers in the 332nd, every kill wasn't just victory in the sky. It was proof against decades of doubt. That day, the Red Tails didn't just escort bombers. They escorted history itself. By the end of 1944, the skies over Europe were alive with war. Hundreds of bombers flew every morning. B-17, Flying Fortresses, and B-24 Liberators, lumbering giants that carried the weight of Allied strategy on their wings. Their survival depended on one thing: their escorts. For the men inside those bombers, seeing Red Tails above the clouds became a symbol of hope. The 392nd Fighter Group had developed a reputation that spread through every airfield in Italy and southern France. Crews whispered it before missions: "If the Red Tails are with us, we'll make it home." They weren't the flashiest pilots. They didn't chase kills or break formation. Under Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., discipline was everything. He reminded his men constantly, "The measure of a mission isn't how many you shoot down, it's how many you bring back." That discipline paid off. During over 200 escort missions, the Red Tails lost fewer bombers than any other American fighter group in the European theater. Their record, fewer than 25 bombers lost under their watch, became the stuff of legend. To bomber crews, those Red Tails became angels. Through flak bursts, through waves of Messerschmitts, they held their line. When other fighter groups peeled off in pursuit, the 332nd stayed. They fought with patience, precision, and unshakable loyalty to the men behind them. Letters from bomber crews soon reached Tuskegee headquarters, filled with gratitude and disbelief. One wrote, "We watched them fight off enemy after enemy and never leave our side. Those Red Tails saved my life." For the first time, white bomber crews and black fighter pilots were bonded by something stronger than prejudice: survival. Respect replaced doubt, and admiration replaced mockery. In the freezing skies over Germany, those Red Tails became more than paint. They became a promise, a symbol that courage and discipline could bridge any divide, even at 25,000 feet. By late 1944, the skies over Germany had changed. The Luftwaffe, desperate to turn the tide, unleashed a new weapon: the Messerschmitt Messentus 62, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was faster, deadlier, and unlike anything the Allies had seen. Bomber crews called them Silver Streaks. At nearly 550 miles per hour, the Me-262 could slash through a formation before anyone could react. To the Germans, this was their miracle, a chance to strike back. But on one cold day in March 1945, the miracle met the Red Tails. The 332nd Fighter Group was escorting bombers over southern Germany when spotters saw flashes rising through the haze. "Jets!" Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. gave the order. "Stay with the bombers. Engage only if they attack." Moments later, the Me-262s dove in. Their cannons shredded the air with fire, and the Red Tails pounced. Using their Mustangs' superior turning ability, they forced the jets into tight maneuvers where speed was no advantage. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, leading one of the flights, spotted a jet streaking toward the bombers. He rolled inverted, dove, and fired a burst that tore into the Germans' engine. The jet spiraled down in flames. One of the first Me-262s ever destroyed by Allied fighters. Two more followed that day, all by Red Tail pilots. The Luftwaffe had believed its new technology would restore air superiority. Instead, it exposed a new truth: no machine could outfly discipline and teamwork. While the Me-262s vanished after brief attacks, the Red Tail stayed, circling their bombers until every formation was safe. When the bombers landed, their crews knew what they had witnessed. Even Germany's most advanced weapon couldn't break the shield of the 332nd. That battle became a turning point. The Red Tails had faced the future of air combat, and won. On March 24, 1945, the Tuskegee Airmen took on the most dangerous mission of their war: the long-range escort to Berlin. It was the heart of Nazi Germany, defended by the best that the Luftwaffe had left. For the Red Tails, it was the ultimate test. The briefing was short and direct. "We're going to Berlin. Protect the bombers. Bring them home." At dawn, the roar of P-51 Mustangs filled Ramitelli Airfield. Their red tails glinted in the sunlight as they lifted off, climbing into a sky heavy with clouds and smoke. Below them, waves of B-17s headed east, 1,500 miles round trip through some of the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. Halfway to the target, the radio crackled. Enemy contacts ahead. Dozens of Me-262 jets and FW-190s were moving to intercept. The Luftwaffe wasn't surrendering without a fight. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. led the formation himself. He reminded his men of the same words they'd heard since Italy: "Stay with the bombers." The German fighters dove through the formations. Explosions and flak tore through the sky. The Red Tails stayed calm, their Mustangs weaving between bombers, cutting off every attack. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown and Lieutenant Earl Lane both scored kills against the Me-262s that day, while Davis himself shot down an FW-190. By the end of the mission, the bombers had reached Berlin, dropped their payloads, and returned home, all with minimal losses. It was one of the longest and most successful escort missions of the entire war. When the Red Tails landed back in Italy, exhausted and silent, they didn't celebrate. They didn't need to. They had just flown over the enemy's capital and won. That day, the 332nd Fighter Group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation, And the Red Tails sealed their place in history. They had flown to the heart of Hitler's empire and returned unbroken. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was nearly over. The Luftwaffe that once ruled the air was a shadow of its former self. Its veterans were gone, its airfields shattered. But in the final months, a strange thing began to happen. A new kind of respect took hold above the clouds. German pilots, who had once mocked the colored Americans, now spoke of them with caution, even admiration. Intercepted radio traffic told the story. Achtung! The red-tailed ones are here. Avoid them if you can. The laughter that once echoed through Luftwaffe briefings was gone. The same men who had once joked about the experiment now saluted those they fought. During one encounter over Austria, a downed German pilot reportedly raised his hand in salute to a circling P-51 before his parachute disappeared into the snow. The red tail above him wagged its wings and flew on. Among Allied crews, respect had become legend. Bomber groups requested the 332nd by name. Crews painted "Thank you Red Tails" on their fuselages after returning from missions no one thought survivable. To the men of the 332nd, that quiet gratitude meant more than any medal. They had been trained to prove themselves, but in proving it, they had changed minds, on both sides of the front. Every mission they flew rewrote a belief, erased a prejudice, and replaced it with something stronger: truth. In the final weeks, as Germany crumbled below, the skies above it told a different story, one of respect earned through discipline, courage, and sacrifice. The war was ending, but the Red Tails had already won something far greater than victory in battle. They had won recognition. In May 1945, the guns finally fell silent. Germany surrendered. The skies that had once been filled with fire and smoke were quiet again. For the Tuskegee Airmen, victory had been absolute. Over 15,000 missions flown, over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed, and one of the best escort records in the U.S. Army Air Forces. They had fought two wars, one against fascism abroad, another against racism at home, and they had won both in their own way. But when the Red Tails returned to American soil, there were no parades waiting for them. At train stations and airfields, segregation signs still hung in place. Many were told to use separate facilities. The same men who had defended the skies of Europe were reminded they were still not equal at home. It was a bitter contrast. They had earned the respect of bomber crews, Allied generals, and even enemy pilots, yet their own country struggled to see past color. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who led them through every mission, stayed calm as always. He told his men, "Our performance is our protest." The Red Tails returned to duty quietly. Some stayed in the service, others went home to study, work, or raise families. But none of them forgot what they had achieved together, or the example they had set. Their record could not be erased. Every mission report, every bomber they brought home, every salute from a white airman who once doubted them, all of it stood as evidence. The experiment had become excellence. The laughter that started their journey had turned into history's respect. In time, their discipline and courage would inspire a new generation. Their legacy wouldn't end with victory over Germany. It would help change America itself. The war had ended, but the impact of the Tuskegee Airmen was only beginning. Their combat record, their calm precision, their unmatched escort discipline, had reached the highest levels of command. Even those who once opposed their creation could no longer deny their success. In 1948, just 3 years after victory in Europe, President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the United States Armed Forces. It was a turning point in American history, and the Tuskegee Airmen had paved the way for it. The order didn't come from speeches or protests. It came from proof. From flight logs showing 0 bombers lost under their watch on multiple missions. From reports of extraordinary bravery and escort duty. From the respect they earned in the eyes of the very people who once doubted them. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was promoted to general, the first black general in the U.S. Air Force. Men like Charles McGee, Roscoe Brown, and Lee Archer went on to long careers, training the next generation of pilots. They didn't just change the Air Corps, they changed the country. Their example broke the illusion that segregation could coexist with excellence. Their performance became the undeniable argument for equality. In the years that followed, the same discipline that carried them through the skies of Italy carried America towards civil rights. In classrooms, in military academies, and in flight schools, the story of the Red Tails became required reading. Not just for what they fought, but for how they fought. with restraint, courage, and an unshakable belief that dignity was stronger than hatred. Their legacy was written not in words, but in contrails. Across the blue skies of Europe, they had drawn a new map, one that led from segregation to service, from doubt to history. For a time, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen faded into silence. After the war, the nation moved on. New conflicts began, new heroes rose, and the names of the men with red tails slipped quietly into history books, or were left out entirely. Through the 1950s and 60s, few outside the military remembered their record. Their photos gathered dust in archives. Their logbooks sat in storage rooms, unseen. Even their children grew up unaware of what their fathers had done. But the men themselves never sought fame. They worked as teachers, engineers, and business owners. Some stayed in the newly integrated Air Force, helping to train pilots who would later serve in Korea and Vietnam. Their humility matched their discipline. They had done their duty, and that was enough. Then, slowly, history began to catch up. In the 1970s and 80s, researchers and veterans groups began uncovering their story again. Old mission reports were re-examined, interviews recorded, and the truth began to re-emerge. Audiences learned that the experiment had produced not just good pilots, but some of the finest airmen of the entire war. Documentaries, books, and films followed. Each one reignited the pride that had been buried for decades. The world began to realize what those men had accomplished, and what they had endured to do it. By the time surviving airmen stood in front of classrooms or television cameras, their voices were calm, not bitter. They didn't speak of anger. They spoke of excellence, duty, and unity. One veteran summed it up best. "We proved that courage knows no color. The rest of the world just needed time to see it." History had nearly forgotten them, but history corrected itself. It took more than 60 years, but the world finally caught up to the men who had carried red tails into battle. By the early 2000s, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen were old men, their hair silver, their voices quiet, but their story had become legend. America was ready to give them the honor it had long delayed. In 2007, the U.S. Congress awarded the Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the nation. In the grand rotunda of the Capitol, rows of elderly veterans sat shoulder to shoulder as speakers retold their story, from the first training flights in Alabama to the escort missions over Berlin. When the medal was presented, applause filled the hall. Some of the airmen wept quietly. Others simply nodded, as if to say, "We finally landed." President George W. Bush addressed them personally, saying, "You helped win a war, and you helped change our nation for the better. Your courage paved the way for freedom abroad and equality at home." For the families of those who had already passed, the moment was bittersweet. Many never lived to see the recognition they earned. But their names, Archer, McGee, Davis, Brown, and hundreds more, were spoken again, not as experiments, but as heroes. Since then, their story has been told in schools, museums, and films. The Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site stands today at their old airfield in Alabama, the same ground where they once faced doubt and ridicule. Now it stands as proof of what they accomplished. Their medals shine in glass cases, but their real legacy lives in every pilot who saw beyond race, every soldier who serves in a force united by skill, not color. Recognition came late, but it came right. Today, the spirit of the Tuskegee Airmen still soars, not in the roar of piston engines, but in the quiet confidence of every pilot who steps into a modern cockpit wearing Air Force blue. Their example became a foundation for the modern U.S. Air Force, a service built on merit, not color. In bases around the world, from the deserts of Nevada to the skies over Europe, their red tail emblem can still be seen, painted on aircraft, worn on patches, or displayed on hangar walls. It's more than a symbol, it's a promise. The 332nd Fighter Group, their original unit, lives on today as the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing, deployed across the Middle East and Africa. Its pilots, men and women of every background, carry forward the same code the Red Tails lived by: discipline, skill, and respect. When new cadets at the Air Force Academy study aviation history, they learn about the Tuskegee Airmen not as a side note, but as pioneers. They see how precision and professionalism defeated prejudice, how performance rewrote policy, Even NASA astronauts, engineers, and commanders trace their inspiration back to those first black aviators who refused to fail. General Charles McGee flew combat missions in 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, before living to see a new generation of pilots call him a hero. He once said, "Excellence is the best deterrent to racism." That philosophy still guides the force. Every pilot who wears wings today owes part of that honor to the men who proved what was possible at 10,000 feet over Italy. Their legacy is not trapped in history. It's alive. In the engines that start at dawn, in the uniforms pressed with pride, and in the belief that courage and competence are stronger than hate. Time has thinned their ranks. One by one, the Tuskegee Airmen have taken their final flight, their names now written among the clouds they once commanded. But the story they left behind no longer belongs to them alone. It belongs to history. At funerals and memorials across the country, the sound of jet flyovers honors their memory. Silver wings cutting across the same blue they conquered in propeller planes 8 decades ago. Each salute, each folded flag, is a quiet reminder of how far they carried a nation that once doubted them. General Charles McGee lived to be 102. When he passed in 2022, the Air Force flew a missing man formation in his honor. From cadets to commanders, everyone paused because they knew the sky itself had just lost one of its finest. At the Arlington National Cemetery, their graves stand in perfect rows, polished bronze bearing proud names. Visitors still leave small red-painted model planes or patches marked with the 302nd insignia. Children ask who they were. Parents answer, they were men who proved character could change the world. Their story has traveled far beyond hangars and textbooks. It's been taught in schools, shown in films, and carried into space. When astronaut Victor Glover, one of the first black crew members to live aboard the International Space Station, dedicated his mission to them. Even among the stars, the red tails fly on. History rarely offers second chances, but it gave theirs, and they used it to rewrite the sky. They fought for a country that did not yet fight for them, and in doing so, they made it better. The laughter that once mocked them has long since vanished. What remains is respect, pure, enduring, and eternal. When the sun sets behind a red-tailed aircraft today, it glows like a salute. Because courage never fades, and neither do those who once painted hope on the wings of war.